Welcome to International Forum. Our program today is on Afghanistan and the closely related issue of regional security in the Indian subcontinent and Central Asia. President Obama has identified Afghanistan as a far greater security threat than Iraq is or ever was, and has called for a regional approach to tackling the challenge. It is spring 2009. 8 years into the war in Afghanistan since the 9/11 attacks. The situation in Afghanistan is precarious and indeed coming apart rapidly, according to a New York Times editorial on February 20th of 2009. The New York Times said, and I quote, "The situation is unraveling so quickly that aides say President Obama decided that he had no choice but to send another 17,000 troops, while commanders and diplomats try to come up with a strategy to stop the bloodletting and to try to block the Taliban from recapturing the country. The Taliban have now moved into peaceful areas near Kabul," unquote. Making things worse, much worse, is the Taliban's growing influence in Pakistan, which is increasingly destabilizing Pakistan's fragile civilian-led government of President Asif Ali Zardari. So what we're facing today may be the very real possibility of not one, but two failed states. One of the two has nuclear arms, and both are home to countless Islamic militants, training and planning to overthrow their government and launching attacks against the U.S., Europe, and other places where they see conflicts of interest against their jihadist cause. Joining us today as our special guest to talk about all this is Ambassador Robert Finn. Ambassador Finn was America's first ambassador to post-Taliban Afghanistan from March 2002 to August 2003. An ambassador had also served as the American ambassador to the Republic of Tajikistan from 1998 to 2001. Ambassador Finn's long distinguished diplomatic career also included postings in Turkey, Pakistan, and Croatia. He opened the American embassy in Azerbaijan in 1992, and he's now a faculty member at Princeton University. Ambassador Finn is a familiar face on our program, and we welcome him warmly today back on our program. Welcome.
Thank you.
Welcome. It's good to see you again.
Yes.
Yeah, I thought I'd start by asking you, we're now in the 8th year in Afghanistan. Give us a reality check. You must have your own sources of information from Afghanistan.
Well, I don't so much, but I do try to follow things. And I would say that things are not quite as dramatically bad as it seems. I think people are realizing how difficult the situation is because we have a new administration, and President Obama has said that this will be the focus. He's laid out a plan for withdrawal from Iraq. We'll have to see how that works out. But there's been much more attention being given to Afghanistan, and therefore people are realizing the parameters of the problem. Plus, we have the very dramatic deterioration of the situation in Pakistan. But let me just say a few little things in kind of response to your opening remarks. I just saw it before I came, a senior Afghan official estimating that there are 10 to 15,000 Taliban actively fighting in Afghanistan. Okay, so that is not an overwhelming number. The problem
is this the first time that we know such a number?
Yeah, and I'm not sure how accurate it is. It's an estimate, maybe more of a guesstimate. But anyhow, that's a figure. We're not talking about several 100,000. We're talking about maybe several tens of thousands. So that's something to bear in mind. The Taliban are active now around Kabul, in fact within Kabul, but that doesn't mean that they've taken over those areas. It means that they are able to permeate those areas, because remember, this is a guerrilla movement and a guerrilla war. So that's the difference. Our military can physically control any particular area they want to. They can control every area. As far as the sending of troops, that's something that actually had been in the pipeline for a long time, and President Bush didn't take action on it. We have been playing catch-up in Afghanistan from day one with regard to troops, with regard to funding, and with regard to civilian personnel, which I told you before. This is another example of it. So, in fact, President Obama is sending fewer troops than the military had asked for.
17,000 versus 30,000.
Right.
But it doesn't mean that he won't down the road send more.
No, he put this in as a marker. And the reason for that, May, is because, as you say, it's spring. It's already spring in Afghanistan. We have snow in Princeton today. But so they had to get those troops there before the Taliban and Al-Qaeda across the border in Pakistan can start a spring offensive. So that's why he moved very quickly to send this number of troops, even though his new policy is not in place.
Yeah. Now, Tom Friedman, in a piece in the New York Times the other day, wrote about power centers in Afghanistan. And, of course, by that I guess he meant the Karzai, the Taliban, the drug lords, the regional warlords, and who else? And of these power centers, who is the most powerful? Who's really in control of Afghanistan?
It would be easy if there were someone who were in control, and you could say, okay, he's the one. Unfortunately, there is no one who is he's the one, and that's the problem, is that you have these different centers of power that sometimes work together and more often don't work together, that are competing for power and influence and what revenue is there. And that's part of the problem. And we've never put in enough to overwhelm that situation, to saturate it, and to set up the structures we need. Plus, there were systemic problems. We didn't set up a proper government. The police training was done by the Germans for a few years, and it wasn't sufficient, so the United States decided to start contributing, but that was several years into the program. And there are a whole bunch of things that were not done right. But there isn't an overwhelming power, and there isn't an overwhelming power on the other side. You can't call up the Taliban on the telephone. You're dealing with many different leaders. That has its positive aspects too, because you might be able to make deals with different leaders. But the other part of what you said is the issue of Pakistan, which is a very serious issue.
Yeah, we're going to look at that closely later on
in
the program.
Okay, good.
But let's focus on the situation within Afghanistan a bit more. Karzai, President Karzai, it's been repeatedly said that he is corrupt, his government is inefficient and ineffective. Do you agree with that assessment?
I don't think that he's personally corrupt. I haven't seen evidence that, but he's certainly very soft on corruption. And partly it's because he's a tribal leader, and he deals with people in a tribal way, which means that it's not just a question of removing an individual, because that individual has X thousand numbers of people behind him, and that's why he's soft. But this is not an excuse. Okay, if he were to be a proper leader, he should have, when he became president, when he was elected president and the Constitution was enforced, he should have taken some dramatic steps to show that he was in charge in this regard, and he did not do that.
You're saying that he could be and should be more assertive.
Yes, the problem has been from the beginning that he's not been assertive. In the very beginning, that was useful. When the fighting was newly over and you had these very belligerent people in the same room, he was able to bring them together and to get them to talk to one another and actually, achieve some things with them. But as time went on, he necessarily should have become more assertive and aggressive, and he didn't do that. And all of the fault for that is not his own, but some of it certainly is.
Is Mr. Karzai easily replaceable? And people have called for him to step down.
Well, we'd have to see who would be a new leader for Afghanistan. It's an interesting question. He's not going to be there forever in any event. So somebody else will come along. There are a number of candidates who could be good, who are intelligent and have executive powers. The question is, can they achieve a consensus in Afghanistan? Can you get people who could work on a national basis? When President Karzai came in, if you remember, he was called Mr. Afghanistan because he was resonant nationally. I'm not sure that there's anyone out there who has that resonance today.
Talk a little bit about people's lives today. What are people living off of, given that poppy is such an important, significant part of the Afghan economy? So just talk about it. How do people live? Are there people starving today, for example, in Afghanistan?
There are people who are living a very subsistence existence, and I think certainly in the mountains there were people who were near the starvation point during the winter. That will improve a little bit during the summer. Overall, income has more than tripled since 2001. There are lots of good things you can point to in Afghanistan. It's not that nothing has happened, it's that what has happened has been so far short of what people expected to happen in Afghanistan and what people thought would happen outside. That's a disappointment. And the fact that security, instead of improving in an increasing way, in fact, has deteriorated, especially in the last few years. So Afghanistan was one of the poorest countries in the world. It's still one of the poorest countries in the world. And I would argue that if we don't, in cooperation with the Afghans, create a viable economy, then we're always going to have the problem of Afghanistan. Afghanistan has to be able to support itself for the problem of Afghanistan to end, leaving aside all of the security problems. And that's something that could happen.
How successful has been the effort to eradicate the poppy growing?
They've actually eradicated it in a number of provinces. In a large part of the country, particularly in the north, it's been eradicated. The overwhelming majority of the opium grows in the southeast, where the Taliban are most active. You need to have a concerted economic effort to replace the growth of opium with other crops in order to solve the problem of opium.
And have they made progress there?
They've made some progress there. The crops that could replace it in Afghanistan are crops that have a long lead time. They would fruit trees, grapevines, things like this. These are things that were destroyed by the Soviets particularly, and they take years to come back.
Have new ones been planted?
They have started on this, but not everywhere, but yes, programs have been started. And that's what President Karzai wants to do. He wants to adopt the Thai model, which is to support people for X number of years while they make the transition, with the knowledge that at the end of that period of time, if they're still growing opium, that they're going to be prosecuted.
I'd like now for us to turn to Pakistan, the situation there. It's a country that is critically important to the global security, and yet it has myriad serious problems. It's got threats from extremists, militants threatening, and an unraveling economy, and it's got battling civilian leaders, and it's got tensions with the India. Over the Kashmir issue. I mean, how bad is the situation in Pakistan? Is it really as bad as I just described?
Yeah, Pakistan is a very troubled country. It's a very troubled country.
As troubled or more, would you say, than Afghanistan?
Well, as far as if we consider not troubled but troubling, a more serious problem, Pakistan has nuclear weapons. So that's, and it has a much larger population, and it borders India. So there are many more problem vectors. Afghanistan is a problem for itself. Pakistan is a problem for the whole world. And the government, as you say, the government is squabbling with Nawaz Sharif, their political rival, something that's been going on for decades. The army is questionable. The army has ruled Pakistan for most of the time since independence. President Musharraf was forced out, but civilian law has been short-lived typically in Pakistan, so we have to see how that's going to play out. Then we have the problem of India and Afghanistan, two separate problems. The attacks in Mumbai are pretty generally recognized as specifically targeted to create problems between India and Pakistan at a time when there was going to be rapprochement. The foreign minister Qureshi was in Delhi at the time of that attack, and the Indians luckily did not rise to the bait, but nevertheless Pakistan shifted large numbers of troops from the western area where they were fighting the Taliban to the eastern border, Plus, you have an intellectual problem. The Pakistani military is still training itself for dealing with wars with India instead of training itself for dealing with counter-insurgency within its country. But then you have the problem of the Pakistani parliament and people not taking ownership of the problem of fundamentalists in western Pakistan. They've now taken over the valley of Swat, which is only 100 miles from Islamabad, which was, I've served in Pakistan too in the 1980s. And the Swat was a resort place. It was extremely modern and open and relaxed. And now these people, with enforcers from Uzbekistan, bringing in the regional aspect of this, have taken over this area. Yes, these are the Uzbeks who, and this is another very important aspect of this whole thing. These are people who were kicked out of Uzbekistan.
By whom?
By the government there when they tried to push for Islam. Around after the fall of the Soviet Union in the late 1990s. Then went to Tajikistan, took part in the Tajik Civil War, and finally when that was ended, and it was ended because of the model of Afghanistan, because they were afraid they were turning into Afghanistan, these people were then forced to leave Tajikistan and went to Afghanistan.
And when did all that happen?
That happened while I was ambassador in Tajikistan in 1999 and 2000. They went to Afghanistan. They came together with the Taliban in the fighting. In 2001, they were principally involved in the fighting around Mazar-e-Sharif. Then after the Taliban were driven out, they went to Pakistan. Now they're in Pakistan and they're taking part in the fighting there. So it very much is a regional problem as far as that goes. But the Pakistani people still are thinking that this is America's problem. They're not thinking that it's our problem. And I find that to be a very serious and disturbing aspect of the situation.
Yeah, so talk a little bit about the significance of the loss of control by the Pakistani government of the Swat Valley area.
It's
on our strategic interest in that area, because doesn't this mean that the Taliban has free run in that whole large territory?
Well, they did anyway. What it means is the Pakistani government's rationale is that these were laws that were on the books anyhow, put in, by the way, by Benazir Bhutto, the great democratic leader, and that all they're allowing them to do is to enforce these laws on Sharia. That's their take on it. In fact, of course, everyone in the world and the people in the area see this as the government's surrender to the Taliban and allowing them, as you say, to take over this area and to have the free run of this important area very close to the capital. So it's very disturbing.
Now, the Khyber Pass is a critical supply route for military supplies for NATO forces, including American forces, in Afghanistan, and it's been repeatedly attacked. So how does the Swat Valley, which includes the Khyber Pass, now in the hands of the Taliban, affect the supplies? I mean, isn't it sort of, it's like a, what do you call it, they can just choke it off at will?
Yeah, I'm not sure. I'd have to check to see if the Khyber Pass is in Swat. I think it may not be, but anyhow, the point is a valid one. And they have been choking it off, which is why the United States has been looking for transit routes across Central Asia, which they have basically lined up now for non-lethal material. But it's incredibly expensive and it's incredibly long. It takes about a week. One of the other aspects of Afghanistan is that if there were peace in the area, it could be the transit link between Central Asia and the sea. And in 18 hours, you could get from Tashkent to the sea via Afghanistan. So this is by no means a healthy alternative. It's an alternative caused by the problem of the disintegrating lack of control in Pakistan. Now, one of the things that I've been suggesting, and I'm very happy to see that Ambassador Holbrooke is also emphasizing this, is the regionalization.
Richard Holbrooke, the President Obama's special representative to Afghanistan and Pakistan.
That's right, and he's been saying that we have to bring in all of the neighbors, including Iran, and I very much support that. In terms of their own security, they're all frontline states, and they're all very concerned about this spreading into their own territory with very good reason. And so you know, I think we should make our policies towards Central Asia clear, and I think we should address these people and ask them to contribute more. They can provide personnel in terms of development, people who are the same ethnic groups as the people in Afghanistan who speak the languages. They can provide logistical facility. There are lots of things that they can do, and I think they should be a more integrated part of the effort.
Yes, I agree. Talk a little bit about the presence of Al-Qaeda in Afghanistan and Pakistan, because we've been talking about the Taliban presence.
Yeah, well, many people are now saying that Al-Qaeda is no longer really present in Afghanistan in large numbers.
It's not true, is it?
I don't think that's totally true, because I mean, it depends on who you're calling Al-Qaeda, but if Uzbek fighters are part of them, they certainly have been turning up in the fighting in Helmand. Yeah. Plus, the Al-Qaeda leadership is just across the border in Quetta in Pakistan, and all of the Pakistani efforts, or the vast majority of them, have been dedicated towards the tribal areas and towards the fighting in Swat. And Pakistan has lost a lot of soldiers here, let's not forget. But meanwhile, in Balochistan, the Al-Qaeda leadership has been operating more or less openly in Quetta, and nobody's done anything about that.
And what is the relationship between the two groups, the Taliban and Al-Qaeda?
Well, that's a good question. The Taliban, who are called Mujahideen in the area, fighters, not Taliban, which means students. That's a term that they use for mostly, but not all, Pushtun people who are indigenous to the area, both in Afghanistan and Pakistan. And Al-Qaeda are the foreign fundamentalists who are far stricter Muslims who have come in. Bin Laden is, of course, the most famous of them. They came in and they came to Afghanistan, which had been taken over already by the Taliban and made into an Islamic state. And they came there as guests with the intention of setting up camps for the liberation of Kashmir. Okay, and from those camps that were there, they were also sending people north to Tajikistan and Uzbekistan. They sent some people to Chechnya. These are the same people who appeared in Bosnia. These are people who are involved in a worldwide mission of radical Islam. And that's, I think, the basic difference. The Pashtuns and the Taliban are involved mainly in their own region, in their area, fighting against what they consider to be an invasion of foreigners, of infidels in that area, whereas Al-Qaeda has a worldwide mission. And if we manage to get rid of them from Afghanistan and Pakistan, they would look for somewhere else to go. And they would probably find it. So Somalia, which is the first place where our forces were driven out by fundamentalists, might be a new place for them to go to.
True, true. Okay, looking at the region as a whole, I think, is it right to say that Russia is playing an increasingly important role in that whole region? Did they have anything to do with the recent closing of the American base in Kyrgyzstan?
Well, Russia and China are interested in the area. All of the countries there are interested because, as I said earlier, they see what's happening in Afghanistan as a model for what could happen to them. And Tajikistan very much ended its civil war, in which there was an Islamic group on one side, because they said, we're getting to be like Afghanistan. Uzbekistan has a terrible human rights record, and the rationale for that is we want to stop Islamic fundamentalism. As far away as Russia, we also see very strict programs against what they consider to be Islamic fundamentalism, including in Chechnya. So it's something that all of the states in the area are worried about. Russia and our involvement in our, by which I mean the United States, our involvement in the area has not been clear to people there. So along with supporting us, because they do not want a fundamentalist regime in Afghanistan, they're also nervous because they look at it from the other point of view and they say, oh, a base in Kyrgyzstan, and there was a base in Uzbekistan, and you have an agreement with the Tajiks, and oh, you know, you're much too friendly with the Azeris, and you have a base in Bulgaria, and the Baltic states are gone. So they see this ring around that makes them very nervous. And we haven't really clarified, I don't think, in a convincing way to the Russians that we don't have any other kind of aim there. So that's something that needs to be done to get more of the cooperation. Both Russia and China regard, rightly or not, Inner Asia as their sphere of influence, their history was shaped by their operations there over the centuries, and they're very nervous about other people coming in there. I think we can all understand.
Wouldn't you be? Yes.
Yeah, that's logical from their point of view. So we need to do some clarifying up there. In terms of Kyrgyzstan, I think yes. I mean, it was so obvious. The Kyrgyz official goes to Moscow. He's sitting there next to the Russian official, and they announce that Russia's giving them $2 billion, and the Kyrgyz say, and we're closing the American base, and they say, oh, they're not connected. Well, no one in the world fell for that. But since then, the Kyrgyz has said, well, make us an offer.
Have we made an offer?
It's not
that is more
done. Yeah,
more than what the Russians are paying the Kyrgyz.
No, but you know, you can separate the issue, and so I don't think that's completely over yet. Plus, I remember a few years ago the Russians offered almost exactly the same amount of money to the Tajiks, and then the Tajiks came out the day after a visit from then Secretary Rice saying Russia has always been and will always be our best friend. But then in the end, they didn't get their $2 billion. There were problems. They only got a little bit of it. So I don't think that's over yet.
Now, General David Petraeus, the CENTCOM commander for the U.S., said in January of 2009 that he had agreements with Russia and other countries north of Afghanistan to move supplies, easing reliance on Pakistan. So I mean, have other countries in that area, north of Pakistan, come forth to say, yes, we'll consider doing a deal with you so you can put a base in our country?
No, they haven't said that they wanted a base, but they have said that we can move our materials through. Uzbekistan just agreed it, but these are non-lethal materials, okay? They're not...
No military supplies.
No military supplies. They're non-lethal. I mean, they could be maybe food for the soldiers. I'm not sure what that means, but it certainly doesn't mean guns and bullets. And Uzbekistan has just said that they will allow that, even though they shut down our base. The Turkmen, who have always had a very strict policy of neutrality, said we could fly over Turkmenistan, again, with non-lethal things. But the problems here, one, it's non-lethal. Two, it's enormously expensive and takes a long time. It takes about a week to get things across Russia. The country of Kazakhstan is as large as all of Western Europe. We don't realize the enormous spaces of Asia.
Yes, yes. Let us look at going forward. What are our options? What do we do? What do we do? How do we? Where do we go from here? Many people, experts, security experts, and pundits have called for the U.S. to redefine its goals in Afghanistan. Meaning that the old goals, building a democracy, getting rid of the Taliban, and capturing Osama bin Laden, all of that has now, in hindsight, we can say, well, it didn't work. It was impossible, mission impossible. But so do you go along with that view that we should redefine our goals in Afghanistan?
Well, I don't think we ever defined our goals properly in the first place. I think that was part of the problem. We went in there saying that we were going to prevent Afghanistan from being a base for terrorism, and then we realized, it was clear to me from the start, that we would have to do development, but it was always reluctant, it was always ex post facto and playing catch up, as I said, and that's part of the problem. But to get to what we do today, yes, it's fine to redefine goals, it's fine to clarify what it is you want to do.
And what goals would make sense to you, someone who really knows the region and peoples?
Well, I think we might be able to drive a wedge between the indigenous people, mostly Pashtuns, and these foreigners who've come in, who are pushing a kind of Islam that is much more radical than the people there have had. In their Islam and their tribal way of life, they've been intermeshed since they became Muslim. And what these people are preaching is a different kind of Islam. The Wahhabi sect is an extremist Islam. It's extremist wherever it is, and it's extremist there too. And last summer there was extensive fighting in the tribal area of Bajur between these foreigners, Uzbeks in particular, and the local people, because they saw these people as trying to take over their society. Something similar happened to a lesser degree in Bosnia. So these people wear out their welcome eventually. So there's some movement there. Then we have to deal with the question of the development and security guarantees for the people in the area so they can live their lives. And there's a lot of discussion going on now. Karzai is being accused of being soft on the Taliban. Karzai has said from the start that anyone who will support the Kabul government and not fight against it is welcome to be reconciled with it unless they have committed heinous crimes. So there's movement there. I think the neighbors should be involved. I think Pakistan has very serious problems in working out who's in charge in Pakistan. Who's in charge of the army. The new president tried to get ISI to be responsible to the government. They refused to do that. A few years ago, Musharraf tried to get the madrasas to register. They refused that. So there's a serious problem of power in Pakistan, and that has to be resolved. Ambassador Holbrooke has taken the mantra that for the first time the United States, India, and Pakistan have a common enemy. And I think that's, it's not only clever, it's true. And that's an area in which things can work out. Because if India and Pakistan can lessen, they'll never completely eliminate their security threats. And India is behaving correctly towards Pakistan in this latest thing. Then that, if you can eliminate that problem, then you can deal with the other problem. Mm-hmm. Pakistan can't deal with problems on both of its borders.
Could you, in 30 seconds, tell us what could happen in Afghanistan or to Afghanistan under the best of circumstances and under the worst of circumstances? 30 seconds.
Under the best, I think you'll have a government that has more of a